Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Donnelly, Manager of Webinars for IBM Systems Magazine. And on behalf of IBM Systems Magazine, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation. Rather than holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, today we have an expert on hand to answer your questions in real time. So we'll be presenting in demonstration mode today. So to ask a question, go to the bottom of your screen, and there you'll find a drop-down arrow labeled Ask a Question. So go ahead and enter your question at any time written response. If you experience technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel to alert us, and someone will assist you. Today's webinar, Using the Cloud for Disaster Recovery of AIX and Linux, is sponsored by Storix. Today's featured speaker is David Huffman. David has been a member of the Storix software team for over 20 years and has been its Chief Executive Officer since 2011. David is responsible for setting the overall direction and product strategy for Storix. And with that, Dave, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Janine. Just to correct there, it's actually, I've been with the company since 2002, so I think we're coming up on 18 years instead of 20, but I appreciate that. Okay, I want to welcome everyone to our webinar. This is Using the Cloud for Disaster Recovery of AIX and Linux. And just to also reiterate, we have somebody on hand from our staff who's going to be answering any technical questions. So fire away, use that question and answer section. It's going to be at the bottom of your screen. There's a drop-down arrow labeled Ask a Question. So again, we have somebody from our technical staff who's here to answer any technical questions you may have. All right. So first, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. First, I want to kind of go over what is disaster recovery, because that term is actually kind of used in a lot of different ways, and I've seen it used in different ways. And so I kind of wanted to clarify what we think of when we think of disaster recovery. And we're going to talk a little bit about off-site disaster recovery and different cloud-based backup methods, and more importantly, though, cloud-based recovery methods. That's something to kind of come across on this, is really thinking about from a standpoint of the recovery aspect as opposed to just backing up. And then also what to look for in a cloud provider if you want to, there's different ones that are out there, and so kind of what are the type of things that you're going to want to look for if you're going to be looking into doing this or incorporating this. And then we're also going to do a product demonstration using our software and doing a backup locally and then having that sent off to the cloud. And then we're going to do a recovery in the cloud as part of our demonstration as well. So who are Storix? Well, we've been around since 1999. We are the trusted expert in Linux, Unix backup and recovery solutions worldwide. You might recognize some of the logos of our customers that utilize our product. And I want to talk briefly about disaster recovery planning, because there's a term that I'm going to be using. Now, I'm not going to read all this text, but the most important one really here is your recovery time objective, or RTO. And that's the amount of time that it takes to get that system back up and running. You have your maximum tolerable downtime, which is your entire data center. So you add up all your RTOs and you hope that it meets your maximum tolerable downtime. And so RTO is really what we want to focus on. That's how quickly can I get this system up and running back the way it was before. And so a lot of times that's where disaster recovery comes into play. But like I said, that's just kind of a loaded term. A lot of people are using it for different things. So, I've heard it said, well, it's the user data. If we have a disaster, we've lost the user data. We got to get the user data back. Well, that's backup and recovery. I don't necessarily consider that disaster recovery. Sometimes it's just reconnecting to the database, because the database is on a different server, and so a system's gone down, you've got to reconnect it. That's not really what I would consider disaster recovery as well. Really more to the point of what we consider disaster recovery is the operating system itself. So you've lost the entire system that's gone down, not just the user data, not just connections to the database or the database itself, but the actual operating system. And then to take that a step further, why you would need off-site recovery is because what if your entire data center goes down? Okay, so that's a true disaster, is your whole data center's gone down and you have to rebuild everything in a separate location or an off-site location. Now, if you have to go in and reinstall the OS, and this is kind of going back to the idea of disaster recovery and that RTO, getting the system back up as quickly as you can, reinstalling the OS can take a really long time and it's prone to mistakes. Now, you might be saying, well, time-consuming, why? I can provision out of box in no time. I've got these scripts or I've got these provisioning tools or whatever. We're not really talking about from a golden image. What we're talking about is a system that just went down. And so that's the one that probably has all your updates to the system, security patches, maybe third-party applications, you know, and it doesn't have any of your performance tuning. So there's a lot that has gone into getting that system the way it is, and the longer that it's been in production, a delta has been created between what it looked like when you provisioned it to the time that, you know, when things went down. And so that's where it oftentimes that's where the time and the mistakes can come into play, because you may not be aware of everything that's been done to that system since it went online, all those different patches and things, and you may not even have those available to you. So remember, it's all about the RTO. It's all about getting that system back up as quickly as you can. So why risk it? Why, you know, start with a bare install and then try to, you know, put all those patches and get everything back the way it was? Why not just back up the entire thing and get everything back? And so that's really what we talk about when we're saying disaster recovery. Now, offsite recovery, which is kind of the focus here that we're talking about, has been around, you know, the concept of offsite recovery has been around for a while. This was what offsite recovery looked like for many, many years. And then still, I've talked to some sysadmins, this is still what they're doing, you know. So I've kind of termed this as old school, and I got some raised eyebrows at some trade shows because this is kind of what they're still doing. So you got your production site, you write your backups to tape, you put those tapes on a truck, and you send them off to, you know, fireproof vaults somewhere or store, you know, Iron Mountain or somewhere. And then in the event of a failure, you take your tapes and you show up at the recovery site and you start rebuilding all of your systems. Now, it has been modernized a bit more where people are doing data replication. They'll have a production site set up, and then maybe they have a recovery site, and the data is being replicated in a separate location, and then in the event of a failure, you know, they can start recovering their systems from the backups that have been replicated in the other location. So it has progressed and it's got a bit more modern. But now I use these icons because they're easy to use, you know, these generic computer beige icons here. But more realistically at the recovery site, you're going to have a combination of probably physical hardware, virtual machines. You might have a combination of power hardware, Intel. You're going to have different requirements for, let's say, SAP HANA or for Oracle. And so being at the recovery site, you know, it is usually fairly complicated. It's not just, you know, beige boxes in a lot of cases. So what about cloud? Well, you know, cloud's been around for a while, but it's, you know, still touted as the next big thing, you know, for everybody. And it's got its advantages. You know, people talk about it's cheap, unlimited storage, you can get everything on demand, you know, yay, cloud. But I want to dispel some myths about cloud, especially when it comes to terms of backup. So cloud computing is a completely different model than what most people are familiar with in their own internal data centers. And you may have heard this term before, between cattle and pets. Cloud computing is all about cattle, meaning that the systems are spun up, they all look exactly the same, and you can take them down, and there really is no need to care so much about them. But when you're in a production environment and you've got, you know, your business is running off of these mission-critical applications, again, that you've patched, that you've done security fixes, that you've done performance tuning and so forth, those are really your pets. Those are the things that you don't want to just, you know, kill off and replace. You know, it's hard to replace a pet, okay? It's easier to replace these cattle. But the cloud environment has been built for cattle. It has not been built for pets. And so if we kind of look at our big players here, so for AWS, if you were thinking about, hey, I want to write my backups to AWS, which is what a lot of people think about. When they originally think about, I want to move stuff to the cloud, how do I get it into AWS? It's actually not that easy when you're talking about taking systems that are on-prem that are already customized and actually getting them up there. First of all, there's no power. It's going to be Intel only. You can't use your OS. You have to use their OS. So again, you're going back to the idea of I'm having to start with a base OS. I have to reapply everything and get it back to the way it was. And there's actually no interactive console access. So what typically happens is you ask for a VM, or you order, the compute nodes that you need, and they send you back SSH keys and say, here you go, log in. Well, at that point, you've already got this base OS. You can't really do anything with it other than, start trying to recreate the one that you have on-prem. So it's not really disaster recovery. Google Cloud, same thing, Intel only. They do have a little bit better as far as, you can take your on-site OSs and kind of convert them into these raw disk images and try to get those up there. But again, you're not really restoring in the cloud. You're kind of having to go through all this trouble of creating these raw disks and then sending them up there. And again, in the idea of where you're doing, backups on a regular basis, you want to be able to, take the most current backup and do the recovery of that. And, most people aren't going to be going in and creating these raw, migrated images all the time. So Google Cloud's not great. IBM Cloud, well, hey, it's got power, right? But for their public offering, now again, I'm going to limit this to their public offering. They have other offerings, that we do take advantage of that don't have this limitation. But if you were to go into the IBM Cloud today, basically you're limited. You have to use their OS again. You can't put your own OS up there. There's no interactive console access, so you can't actually watch the system boot and configure it how you want to. Again, they're going to hand you SSH keys, and you're back. You're basically in a base install. So the cloud backup model, and this is what we see a lot of times that we've talked to people about is, hey, I want to get my backups into the cloud. And this is where I like to turn things on its head a little bit and say, well, backing it up to the cloud should not be, your first concern. You should really be thinking about recovery. And so what you end up with is, hey, my backups are up in the cloud, but now how long is it going to take to get my data back down out of the cloud to do my recoveries on-prem? And so that's where the cloud really falls on its face because, again, you can send everything up to the cloud and it's great, it's stored off-site, but when you actually need it in a pinch, it's going to take forever usually to get it back down. Most people don't care how long it takes to get there, but when it comes time to get that data back and get those systems back online and that RTO comes into play, this is where it really creates a problem. Now, there are other models out there. Zerto is one company that's doing kind of the pre-stage model. And so what that is that let's say your environment is a mixture of, you've got VMware, maybe you've got some physical systems, maybe even you're running Hyper-V. Well, what they say is, well, on-premise, go ahead and convert everything to VMware and then move it up into the cloud. And so you have them pre-staged up in the cloud. Problem with that, though, is that, when you're managing a large environment, that means every single system that you're putting out there, you're going to have to do this migration to. Every single time you do an update, make sure to migrate it over because, again, the images that are up in the cloud, these VMware images that you have to pre-stage, are going to be stale. They're going to be old compared to what's on site, in a very short period of time. So you're going to either have to be constantly doing this and converting them to VMware, which is not typically what you want. And again, this is only for Intel. What about for Power? You can't really do that with Power. So this is where we come in, where we have a different approach. This is our CloudBMR model. And so all of your, physical systems, Linux, AIX, Power, or Intel, you're going to be backing those up on-prem, but then those backups can be sent up to the cloud, to a server that's sitting up there storing it. But rather than the idea of it taking a long time to get everything back down, why not just restore everything in the cloud? And so with our process, whether it will be physical or virtual systems, even different hardware, because of the capabilities of our software, we can then take those backups that are stored in the cloud and actually restore them in the cloud. And so now the time of recovery is lightning fast because all of the data is already up there, already accessible. And these cloud environments, the way they're built for performance. So you may actually find that backing up to the cloud and then when you do your recovery in the cloud, it might actually be faster than it is on-prem, even if you were going to be restoring from local backups, because that system can get up very, very quickly because of the performance that they have already set up in the infrastructure. And you don't have to worry about having a specific location. So in the event like you're using SunGuard or using a second data center, Well, if that's also in the path of the hurricane or the tornado, the reason why you're having to do this, that becomes a problem, whereas the cloud, quote unquote, is geographic, non-specific, and a lot of times these cloud providers have got replicated data centers. And so, you can basically pull up your laptop from anywhere in the world and actually do this. You don't have to get on a plane and fly out to the other data center to start building out your systems. You can just do everything remotely. And that includes, for us, that includes AIX, Linux, Intel, and Power-based systems. So what is this adaptable system recovery process? How are we able to make this happen? So we'll just kind of briefly go over that. So when most people think of backing up the entire system, they're thinking of disk images, which is oftentimes that what we call a brick of data, which is, considering that's your operating system. And when it comes time to restore it, you're going to have to put it back on either the same virtualization, same hardware, same disk size, same disk geometry. Everything's going to have to be exactly the same. But our process is not block-based. It's actually file-based. And we also capture the information about how the system was built. So at the time of recovery, we actually rebuild the system from scratch. We remake, volume groups, logical volumes, file systems, mount them up, restore your data back to it. And so it's much more fluid. And so while we're doing this rebuild, we can actually go in and retailor things. So if your storage environment is completely different or the hardware is completely different, that's not a problem. So let's say on-prem, you've got physical systems, and you can restore them to virtual machines in the cloud. You have that capability. Or on-prem, you're on Power 7, but hey, we got Power 8 in the cloud, or however you need to make those changes. It's possible with our adaptable system recovery process. So kind of adding up the secret sauce of how this is going to work is, first, you need to start with a cloud provider that's going to allow you some sort of boot or console access. You can't start with their OS and they give you SSH keys. You really do need to have the, almost hypervisor level access to the images themselves, or to the virtual machines. Using our adaptable system recovery process, again, you don't have to worry about whether or not you have the exact same version of VMware or everything is set up exactly the same. Again, with our process, it could be physical or virtual systems that we're backing up, and we can restore them into whatever the cloud environment is, whether they're using Hyper-V in the cloud, they're using KVM in the cloud, or they're using, VMware in the cloud, or Power VM in the case of Power Systems. Again, Intel and IBM Power, you're going to want that because of your mixed environment, and you want good support resources. So you don't necessarily want to be winging this because it's a pretty critical thing. Now with Storix, obviously we're providing support with that. We also work with SkyTap, who is also backed by the IBM Cloud. So as I mentioned earlier, IBM Cloud's public offering isn't very flexible, but to our business partners and people we work with, we do have that flexibility. So let's go ahead and do a little demonstration here. Now this demonstration, I will have to say, part of it's live, part of it's Memorex, because I wanted to be able to show you the whole process. But during the backup and copying it to the cloud, I didn't figure we would want to sit and wait for that. So I've actually pre-recorded that portion just so you can see what it looks like, but then we don't have to sit and wait and look at the screen, waiting for a while. All right, so here's our environment. Let me just check our environment here real quick. Okay, so here's our cloud environment, and so we're working with SkyTap on this. Now, it doesn't have to be SkyTap. They just happen to be a vendor that we recognize and we work with that do provide everything that we need. They kind of have that secret sauce. And I've got a mixture here of Power systems, as Linux on Intel, Linux on Power, and AIX kind of in a mixed environment where they all work together. So this is why we really like working with SkyTap. Now here's the SB admin interface. And right now I've got some clients and servers configured. A lot of times in our demos I'll actually go through and set these up. So if you want to see the whole process of that, you can sign up for one of our other webinars that we conduct. Those are where we actually walk through the setup of the software and so forth. What I really want to do is go kind of highlight configuring our backup jobs that we're going to run. Because that's going to explain a lot about the software. So First off, we want to be able to back up our systems, and because we're sending this data off-site, you want to limit the amount of data that's actually going across. And so you're going to want to use an incremental scheme. Now, some people have asked, what about deduplication? Well, deduplication is really for block level backups, or block, where it's exchanging blocks and things. But it's not for file-based backups. Those are for image-based backups. And so for file-based backups, we use what's tried and true, which is incrementals and differentials. And so we want to start off with our incremental level 0. That's our base install. We're going to back up everything. And then later we can do subsequent backups that only back up the changes that have occurred. So we're going to start off with our monthly level 0. And we're going to write it first to our local environment on-prem. And we have lots of different backup options, directories and file systems and so forth. We're going to want to do a full system backup in this case. That's going to back up the operating system as well as all the user data. Now, for those people who are AIXers and you're familiar with, make sysbs, this is going to back up more than just root VG. This is actually going to pick up all of the volume groups. And we want to go in and customize that and actually set that as an incremental level 0. Let me save that. So that way it catalogs, everything gets backed up in this backup on a monthly basis. So that way subsequent backups that I do during the month will only be backing up changes. And I'm going to select actually 2 of my clients here, which I'm going to do a recovery of later on. And I'll go ahead and schedule that. So I'm going to say I want to do it every first of the month at 1 a.m. Okay, I'm going to write that over to a directory on-prem because that's going to make my backup window go quickly. So I'm going to write it quickly here, and then I'm going to have the backup copied. And so that's the next step here, is I'm going to specify that when this backup is done locally, now I want it copied up to the cloud. So I can select my server. I have my on-prem server configured. Now I have SkyTap as my other server configured. So I can write to SkyTap. I have an offsite location there, and I'm going to have this happen immediately. Now I could actually specify and say I want this to happen a couple hours later, or I want it to happen maybe today after 7 p.m. Maybe I want to wait until everybody's out of the office. So this copy can be scheduled on your time. It doesn't always have to be exact as soon as the backup is completed. Go ahead and save that. And then also, as part of the backup job, I want to create our bootable media. Now, I'm going to talk a bit more in depth as to what the bootable media is, but when you think about bare metal recovery or disaster recovery, there is no OS where we're going. So how do you take, blank hard drives and actually recover a system when there's nothing really to boot from? So you have to create some sort of bootable media to boot the system up to a point where you can then access the backups over the network and actually do the recovery. And so the bootable media, we have options here. We can either create a CD-ROM ISO that we can boot from, we could do network boot, or we could create both if we wanted to. In this particular case, we would create our network boot media, and we're going to store that up on our SkyTap server. Okay, so now I have my monthly backup here ready to go. I can go in next and create, let's say, a weekly one. Again, I'm going to write that locally. Instead of doing a full system, though, this time, I'm just going to do the volume groups. And I haven't specified all but root VG. I'm going to say, no, I actually want all volume groups looked at. And I'm going to include both systems. Again, I don't have to create a job for every single client that I have. I can put them all in one job. And I can customize that and say, I want that to be a backup, incremental backup level 1. Save that. And I can schedule this one, let's say every Sunday at 2 a.m., for instance. And then again, I can have this one copied. Send that one up to SkyTap after we're done. And there we go. Okay, so now, as part of my backup job scheme, I can do this monthly level 0, which is going to back up everything, seed the cloud with that. and then I could do these weekly level 1s. I could move this off to, doing daily level 2s, even hourly level 3s. If you're familiar with incrementals, you'll understand the differences there. But basically, you want to reduce the amount of data that you're actually sending up to the cloud. So on a monthly basis, not a problem to get everything up there. But then once it's up there, then you can always go back and say, now I'm just going to back up changes. And that's going to be a lot less data transfer that's going up there. Now, normally, these demos, I would go ahead and start the backup and actually, as we walk through it. But I did some timing on it. I think we're not going to be able to make, do a full demo if we actually watched that to happen. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, if everybody can see this. So I've got this job in my backup queue right now, and we can go in and see the status of the job as it's running. So now I want to talk a little bit about boot media. So this is actually starting the job, and the first thing, as I mentioned, is the job is we're going to create bootable media. So we're going to go on, right now we're backing up AIX, so we're going to go ahead and create our boot media for AIX. Now, this does serve, I do want to explain this a little bit better. A lot of people are thinking, well, a MakeSysB is a bootable backup. Well, yes and no. A MakeSysB is actually a backup that is tied to a boot image. So they're encapsulated into kind of one thing, but they really are two separate items. The backup is not bootable. The boot image is bootable. It just happens to be, attached to the backup. Well, SBadmin takes a little different approach. We actually separate out the boot image from the backup. So that way, when you go to boot up from your bootable media, you can then go in and select, hey, I want the backup from 2 weeks ago, not the one from yesterday. So it provides you a lot more flexibility. And also, these boot images are fairly small, so in storing them. So when we go in, you can see here, I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, so you can actually, as we go along here for the backup here. You'll appreciate that. Well, why don't we give you just a generic rescue disk, or why don't you use the install disk to actually boot the system up to start the recovery? Well, because we want to make sure that you have all of the device support that's on that backup on that bootable media itself. So we actually go to the running system and we basically create the bootable media from the running system. So that way, if you've done patching, you're at a certain kernel level, you've in the case of Linux, let's say, you've gone in and even, compiled other modules, you've rolled your own kernel, we want to make sure that all of that device support is going to be available. So whatever that system inherently can support, we're going to be able to recover onto that. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realize with Linux is that, they think, well, I booted up this system and installed it, so it only has the drivers for this hardware. That's actually not the case. In Linux, all of the device drivers have to be built against a particular kernel level. So under the covers, every bit of device support that is available to that system that it supports is available on the system. And we put it on that boot media. Because when it comes time to recover, we'll actually go in and do device detection and load different drivers. So that's where that adaptable system recovery process comes into play. We will actually, we can make a lot of changes there with the hardware and things, and the software is going to be able to account for it. And if you're concerned about, well, will this work on this hardware and so forth, all you really have to do is say, does this OS work on this hardware? And that can easily be found either on IBM's site or Red Hat's site or SUSE's site, where they can say, yep, this hardware is supported for this version of the operating system. And as they support, they go through and certify hundreds and hundreds of different, vendors and things. So most likely, everything is going to work, Okay, so now in our kind of demo here, we've gone in, we've already done our backup, and so now we're actually copying it up to the cloud. So again, it ran locally, which is a little faster, and then now we're copying up to the cloud, and I'm just using an internal network here, so it's not the type of performance you might get if you have dedicated networking to your cloud provider. This is just kind of public cloud, the SkyTap, so we're actually going over just the basic internet. But, we get everything up there. So we back it up locally, then it gets copied up to the cloud. So we've got just a couple of minutes as we go through this portion of it right here. So I wanted to take this time to kind of highlight, for those people especially who came in later, is that we do have somebody on hand to answer any of your technical questions. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a drop-down arrow that's labeled Ask a Question. And again, we've got somebody on hand who's very, very knowledgeable and is going to be able to answer any questions that you can basically throw at them. So please take this time to go in and ask any questions that you may have about your particular environment or, best practices and so forth when it comes to, making these backups and backing them up and sending them onto the cloud. Now, one question we oftentimes get is, well, what's the performance? How long is it going to take to do my backups or my copies to the cloud? That is really relative to your own environment. So in particular, like in this case, I'm using pretty slow networking here. I don't have a dedicated line to the cloud provider for this demo portion. So not getting great performance here, but again, that's on this. The software itself won't be your bottleneck. So if you have a fast connection to either you're using a cloud provider or you're even just writing it to a secondary data center, if you've got, fiber between two data centers, it's going to be lightning fast. It'll be just like it is on-prem. Now, how fast, do we expect on-site? Typical case, you see anywhere between 50 to 100 megs a second is typical for a regular production environment. And so really comes down to the speed of the disks, the speed of the networking, and then how much data. Those are really the three factors you can, put together. All right, so we copied everything up to the cloud. We've made our backups. So now let's actually do a live recovery. So this is live, not Memorex. I'm refreshing these because I don't want the page to time out on me. To relog back in. Okay, so like I said, in my SkyTap environment, so I have a server called offsite server here, and this is where my backups were being stored, all right? And then I happen to have a couple of virtual machines or cloud systems that are ready to go. So I've got my AIX system already in SMS, so I booted it there. This system, I'll go ahead and reboot and then power it back on and actually do a Pixie boot. So again, we're going to do network booting. Now, my system that's in the cloud for today's purposes is an AIX system. Could be a Linux system, could be Linux on Power, could be AIX. I just happen to use AIX. Again, it's interchangeable. So you can boot AIX from Linux, Linux from AIX. Doesn't really matter for our purposes. You could use either in that case. So we've got an AIX system here that we're using to store our backups, and we're going to do our network boots from. So let's go ahead and in SMS here, you may already be familiar with this menu here. Now, I've already gone in to the IPL, set my IP parameters. So kind of don't need to walk through that necessarily. So let's go ahead and select my boot options. Okay, so remember, this is the boot image that we created earlier as part of the backup job that got copied up here when we ran the job. So this is the boot image that I'm actually booting from. And then while that's coming up, why don't we go ahead and reboot this system. Let's see if I can catch the boot menu. It goes quick. There we go, I got it. Okay, so notice here I'm on SkyTap. I'm in SMS on this system. And I'm over on VMware over here. All right, so let's Pixie boot this system up. Okay, it's asking me what terminal type. I'm just going to select BT220. That looks good. There. So that's the Storix system installation and maintenance menu. This is what you would see whether you booted over the ISO or over the network. And so while that one's booting up, let's go through the AIX screen here. Now, we've already selected the server. That was kind of part of when I configured the client for network boot, but I want to go in and select the backup. Now let me kind of show you some options here, and this is especially for on-prem. So if you're installing, I could be installing from local tape, local disk. I could be getting my backups from, let's say, an NFS share, or from a remote device. Now that could be the backup server that I have sitting on-prem, or it could be, remote. In this case, I'm in the cloud. And then it was a disk backup that I'm actually backing up remotely, or I'm going to recover from remotely. There's my backups. There's the AIX one that I did. Okay. And then I do need to go in and change my volume group settings because my physical volume ID has changed. So this is kind of to prove that it's not smoke and mirrors. The PV ID in AIX has changed, and so I need to go in and select which disks. So again, I have two volume groups here. It's not just root VG. I've got data VG as well, and so I want to go in and select which disk I want it to go on. So I'm just going to have it go on HDisk 0 for root VG. Go down to data VG, make that one HDisk 1. Now, if I wanted to, I can also go in and make some changes to my logical volumes. Let's say I wanted to increase the size of a logical volume, reduce the size. Any of those things, I can make changes on the fly because of that adaptable system recovery process. I can even go in and make changes to my file systems if I wanted to. So I'm going to go ahead and install the system. Now, if I was doing a DR test, let's say in my environment, this is kind of nice because I'm actually doing this DR install, bringing this system up in a segregated environment from what's actually on-prem. So this system is still up and still running, the AIX 7.2 system that I'm recovering, but I'm recovering it in the cloud, and so they can't really see each other network-wise. So I can actually, while that's still running in production, if I need to do DR tests, this is a great way to do DR tests. Okay, so we'll let that run. Let's go ahead and start our Linux install here. And again, the menus look very, very different. It's in blue here because we happen to be on a different kind of terminal type. And we want to select Remote Disk Backup. There we go. And again, I can go in and install the system at current settings. I can go in if I wanted to and make changes. Now, it says no problems were found. That's actually an important thing to point out. It said no problems found. The software will actually tell you if there are problems, which a lot of software won't do. A lot of software says, okay, you're going to do what you did. You know, hope you knew what you're doing. And then you end up getting halfway through the recovery process. The disks aren't big enough. There's some kind of problem with it. No, our software is actually going to go in and say, you know what? This isn't going to fit, or you need to make changes. And so it will let you know what type of changes may need to be made to your storage configuration before you actually start the recovery process. So you want it to say, hey, no problems were found. That way you know everything is going to go without a hitch. So let's go ahead and install. Okay, just kind of a little play-by-play here of what's going on. For Linux here, at least you can see that. Oh, AIX is already finished, and we're actually rebooting that system right now. So it's going to come up. So we actually went in, and again, we recreated the partition table. We remade our physical volumes, our volume groups, logical volumes, created our file systems, mounted them up, and now we're restoring them. And again, you can see, well, the restore process was pretty quick because this one's already done, and it's just rebooting. And then for our Linux system here, I put that there, you can see it's, going to take about a couple of minutes here to restore fairly quickly, up in this cloud environment. So while those recoveries are happening, again, I want to kind of highlight here, if you've got questions, use that drop down. ask the questions. So again, we got somebody on hand to answer them. I want to go back to our slide deck and talk briefly about kind of, and now that you've kind of seen what the product does, what solution is going to be right for you. Now, of course, we're a commercial company. We're going to want to sell you on something. I'm not going to belittle your intelligence on that. But, hey, there's lots of different options. So, with this software, you can basically do your own backups, self-manage everything, store them on-prem, and you don't have to go to the cloud. You could use the same technology if you have, let's say, a secondary data center. So you can actually, basically have backups sitting in a different data center using kind of the same, if you think about it, it's really your own cloud, so to speak. So you can have your backup sitting in an offsite data center and manage everything yourself, and you don't have to really use the cloud for this. So the first option is you don't have to be in cloud. You can actually do this if you have a secondary data center that you can use. So I want to start with that. Secondly, again, self-manage. You configure your backup jobs, how often you want them to run. You set everything up, and you can store those on-prem, and then you can have them copied off to your own cloud instances. So, you don't have to use anybody that we've recommended. We talked a little bit about SkyTap here, but hey, go with who you like. And if you're only on Intel, there's plenty of cloud providers out there who are just doing Intel. If you've got that combination of power and Intel, there's also other providers out there other than SkyTap that do that, but that's who we work with most regularly, and so that's one of the things that we can work with you. So you can either buy the software and manage this yourself with your own data center, buy the software, and use your own cloud if you want to, or we can help you out with that. Whereas, you get full control over the software, meaning, you schedule when the backups happen, what needs to be backed up. And oh, by the way, one thing I didn't mention is that our backups, because they're file-based, you can exclude data from the backup. So unlike any kind of a disk image or even snapshots, you can selectively choose to say, you know what, I don't want to pick up this data. I just want the operating system part of it. The data is being picked up by something else or being replicated or something along those lines. So if you only want a DOS part of it, you absolutely can do that with our software because you can selectively choose not to back up certain data. And again, that's only available because we back up everything as files. If we were doing disk images, well, guess what? It's all or nothing. So we can be backing up, you could manage all those backups, decide what you want to back up, what you want to exclude, and so forth, and then we can help you out with, in Storix Cloud where, we can help set up, we'll have a shared server and you can set up that environment. So we can work with you on that, maybe putting together a plan that's going to work best for your environment. Or you can just throw your hands up altogether and say, you know what, I don't want to deal with it at all. And so Storix is now, introducing kind of our cloud managed services. So we would be able to manage the backups. We're taking care of them and writing to the cloud. And so we will be able to take care of that and monitor that and make sure that's happening. So that's something new that we're going to be offering. So just to kind of put that out there. And we're US-based, and all offerings are with US-based support. Okay, so that's important because we're located in San Diego, and all of our developers and all of our support staff is here on the same campus in San Diego. And that's by design. We want to make sure that if you have a question or something that comes up that's mission critical, you're not talking to a support tech who's in a call center 4,000 miles away from the developers. If we ever need to escalate something, they walk down the hall, basically, to do that. So again, we offer this US-based support by design. We want to make sure that you're going to get the best support you can possible and make sure that we have the least, the closest line to the developers in case we ever need to escalate anything. All right, so let's run back here. We're getting close to near the end of the hour here. So our AIX system is booting up here. This is our Linux system here. We finished it up. So I'm going to go ahead and type exit to have it reboot. Now, again, this system that I'm actually recovering did not have to come from another VMware environment. It actually could come from physical systems. In this particular case, it came from KVM-based VM. So a completely different virtualization technology. So we're using, open source KVM on this system originally that I backed up, and I just restored it in VMware. It could have been a physical system, could have been, Hyper-V, didn't matter. As well as, I believe I am Power 8 on my AIX system as soon as I get my prompt there. There we go. So I've got that system back up and running. AIX is taking just a second to boot up. You know how AIX is. I want to go ahead and thank you. Let me go ahead and give you this is our contact information, so you can always reach us at sba@storix.com, or you can reach us by phone at 619-543-0200. And we offer proof of concept support, so if you're wanting to do this, you can also download the software for free. We do a 30-day trial. And, basically everything that I've done today, you can do with the trial software. So if you wanted to try this out, you could. And we offer proof of concept support, so during that time, you also are offered support. So you can call us on the phone and get help in setting this up, or if you have questions about best practices or what's going to work best for your environment. We're there to help.